Paul and Barnabas to be, Zeus and Hermes. Is that who it is, or something like that? And it just makes total sense. Like, you're like, oh wow, this was always so weird, but now I actually understand. Like, of course that's what they're doing.
Welcome to Classical Etc., a show that dives into the philosophy, culture, and heart of classical education. You're in the studio with Shane Saxon.
Hello and welcome. My name is Shane Saxon, and this is Classical Etc. I sat down with Ethan Gotcher, a close friend of mine and a fellow coworker in the schools division at Memoria Press, and Ethan Gotcher is a man of integrity. He's a person who I've looked up to as long as I've known him because of just the length that he will go to serve people and to follow up on his word, and a lot of it comes from just a very deep-rooted faith that he has. As a classical Christian publishing company, it's something that's very important to what we do. And so Ethan and I sat down, we talked about his realization that there was something lacking in education, and then finding a home in Memoria Press and the curriculum that we develop, and then talking about some of the fruits of that in his own life as he has started studying classical literature and helped schools to navigate the waters of creating a genuinely Christian classical education. I think you'll enjoy this conversation. Ethan, I want to reflect on a conversation we were having yesterday where in a moment of transparency, you shared with me that you don't have a sense of humor. And I'm thankful that you realized that. And I just kind of wanted to ask you, when did you first realize it? What steps are you taking to gain a sense of humor?
Yeah.
I appreciate your honesty. Okay, no, but I really do want to talk about Jesus at some point, make that transition. Because you are a serious person, and I think that's actually one of your greatest strengths. And I really just tease you about not having much of a sense of humor.
Yeah.
But you're a very serious person, and it seems to kind of affect a lot of everything you do. I think, to use some of the Christianese that people in our circles use, you live an intentional life. You want the lordship of Jesus to have an influence on your work life, your educational life, all of these things. And I really respect how much you've deeply personalized your faith. And so that's what I wanted to talk to you about, because I think a lot of people are coming to classical education from varying perspectives, but this is one that is very special to you, and I think holds a lot of what we do together, because we are a classical Christian publisher.
Yeah, good. Thanks, man.
You said at the beginning in a conversation we had that when you first came to Memoria Press, you were pretty, foreign to the concept of classical ed, but you had already been thinking about some of the deficiencies of progressive education, even though your wife is a public school teacher.
Yeah.
So tell me about where you came in at, and I think that'll lead to interesting stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So for listeners out there, I've been working for Memoria Press for about 3.5 years now. And really grateful for my time here and all that it is. All that it's meant to me and continues to mean to me and to our family. So, as Shane, you said, my wife was an elementary education major in college, and she taught for 4 years before we started having babies, which we have since done with a good deal of rapidity. At any rate, we knew that we wanted to homeschool, at least in the early years, partly because of my wife's gifting, and her desire to do it, but also, it just sort of innately bothered me. I think that just the idea of sending, a 5-year-old to my 5-year-old kids to like school for 40 hours a week. Just bugged me. Like, I just think they're still so young. It's still, there's still so much, formation, happening in those early years. And, I just knew that wasn't what I wanted for our family. that I wanted, us as their parents to be able to, if we could, financially. I know there are families out there that financially can't, but if we could, by any means, financially, I wanted us to be more hands-on in the early years of our kids' education, especially. So that's kind of where I came in. But yeah, not knowing much about classical education, not really having a great vision for the kind of education we would provide for our kids at all.
Yeah.
So
You were looking out there and said, I don't want that.
yeah.
But what was your educational background, your wife's educational background? And had you thought, we're going to try and capture this or that from your guys' background?
I don't know. Yeah. So I was, went to a Christian school, it was not classical, but I went to a Christian school, as a kid. And then my wife was public school educated her whole life and then taught in public school for 4 years. So, and having said all of that, my wife, I mean, she would just have said, like, she experienced like the brokenness of our public school system, and she just knew she didn't want that for our children. But and I think for myself, I was thankful for pieces of my education, but I also don't know if I realized if I had a great vision.
You then came to Memoria Press, though.
Yep.
And things started to click for you.
Yeah. Well, I do think that one of the things that I've completely been sold on and believe in is the centrality of Latin in a good curriculum, and really the importance of having a cumulative study of a language be part of a curriculum. So, I mean, I got to experience studying, ancient languages in seminary, and I think I was it was clear to me just what a rigorous test of my own mental faculties language study proved to be. And so then it wasn't surprising when I get here and I read Cheryl's pamphlet, how Latin develops the mind, right? And how she would talk about, the mind being formed by the kind of thing it's studying, right? She has some articles on that kind of thing, and that just like really resonated pretty readily. And like, yes, I think this makes tons of sense as to why a consecutive study of Latin is of tremendous value to an education.
What's your pushback when people say, teachers and administrators that you're talking to, because you are the head of the schools division, you're talking to a lot of teachers on a daily basis and administrators, when they're pushing back and saying, love classical ed, but Latin's really hard and it's not really feasible. You studied languages as a graduate student. Yeah. Why should we expect 10, 11-year-olds to study Latin?
Well, have you looked at First Form Latin? I guess that's my pushback. You can do this. I think if there's one thing I'm just convinced that that we do really well as a company is I think we make it attainable. And it presents challenges for schools for sure. I mean, schools have to wrestle through, when I accept a 6th grader, he's, 2 years behind his peers in a certain subject. And what do I do with that? And there's a lot, and if it's a great family and a great student, I really want to take the student, but it presents logistical difficulties, so there's no doubt that it does raise challenges. But I think that the benefits are well worth it if schools will stick with it, and I think that their teachers can do it. Between our DVDs and our teacher training conference, and we just have so many resources to make it doable if you'll put in the work. So yeah.
And Latin kind of branches into classical studies. Would you teach classical studies? It seems like something you gravitated toward.
Yeah. So I think that. I like to tell people that I think classical education reaches farther back and deeper into the past than any of its kind of rival visions of education, that are popular today, right? And for me, like, it wasn't until seminary almost that I realized that, like, you know, Alexander the Great and like the wars with the Persians, the Persian Empire, actually overlaps with the tail end of the Old Testament. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
or like the Persian Wars, and then, you know, after which you have the rise of Alexander the Great. So that is after, that is sort of in the you know, between the Testaments time. But you know, it's just like basic things like that where it's like, I know the Bible because, you know, I was raised in the church. But I don't know how it fits in with like much of the rest of the world, you know, at the time.
Yeah, it's surprising to find things like Latin translations and Greek translations of the Old Testament before the New Testament was written, and there's so much context out there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So, so I think that it fills in like gaps historically, but then as I hinted at earlier, I mean, I think like it's not just about history, it's about these civilizations and all of their, you know, literature that so affected our literature, their stories that so infuse our own stories, their philosophy that has so set the trajectory for, and in some ways, the standard for good thinking, you know, for so many years to come. I mean, there's so many things. I read a book recently where the guy just said, why do we always start with the Greeks? You know, it just seems like all roads, you know, there's the famous phrase, like all roads lead to Rome. Well, it just seems like when it comes to like studying something, if you ever really trace it back far enough, you kind of end up with the Greeks. Yeah. Like it just like all roads in terms of learning more or less lead to the Greeks.
Yeah, all roads lead to Rome because they stole everything from Greece.
Because that's right. Yeah. So, right, there's the saying of Horace, I think, who says, like, in captivity, Greece captured her great captor. So, like, anyway, but yeah, so that's definitely, there's definitely truth in that. But anyway, so I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, definitely. And doubling back to the beginning of our conversation, you've always been someone I look up to in terms of just how much you guard your faith, how much you are serious about trying to cultivate a spiritual aspect of your life. But yet in talking about this kind of discovery of classical education, the benefits of it, you haven't mentioned very many explicitly biblical or spiritual themes. In what ways does that connect with your pursuit of trying to be a faithful Christian?
Yeah. So just like what ways does kind of what I've learned in classical education, what's the intersection?
Yeah, where does it connect for you?
Yeah, well, for one thing, I think that we have to, for one thing, I think we have to realize just the importance of philosophy, right? And of like a way of viewing an understanding of the world that's Christian at its bottom. You know what I mean? And not that sort of only kind of adopts like Christian garb, but that thinks Christianly, you know, kind of from the ground up.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, you know, one example would just be, you know, kind of the transcendental values that we're always talking about in classical education of like truth, goodness, and beauty, and their kind of objective reality that is outside and of us and other than us. And I think that those things are those commitments to this is the way the world is, and recognizing that is important in education, but isn't important as a Christian. And another thing we talk about in classical education a lot is like education as as virtue, as being as virtue formation, as well as you know, knowledge and wisdom. And that actually, like, there's an explicit like quote from Plato where he's like, you know, education that isn't forming children in virtue isn't worthy of the name, right? You know, I mean, like. So, I mean, people have thought that education is should be about the souls of a good person, forming the souls of a good person. even outside of a Christian context. So then I just don't think it's hard to see how there's a really ready connection with like what a Christian would want to do in education there. You know what I mean? Like a Christian wants to make disciples of the Lord Jesus, who has in himself embodied what it means to be a good person, who is himself goodness incarnate, right? You know what I mean? Like, so I don't think it's much of a leap to see kind of a pretty big, connection there in terms of what we're trying to do. I don't know if that got somewhat
100%. And I think in the Memoria Press curriculum, we've taken a particular angle on Christian studies that I think is super helpful, but unique from perhaps the education that we grew up with, where we're talking about content and we're learning the facts and stories of the Bible, so that we're filling ourselves with the information and the truths that kind of underlay our faith. And then it's the actual lived experience of that faith with all these other subjects, and then a connection to a church that really grow us. Have you appreciated that, or how did that challenge your view of Christian education?
Yeah. Like just our general kind of approach to Christian studies, you mean? I would say that's one thing I think my education did mostly really well is, just knowing the stories of the Bible. So I definitely think it's incredibly important. We're of many denominational and kind of church backgrounds here at Memoria Press, but we all look to the stories of Scripture as our heritage in some ways, right? And I guess, what the classical adds is it says, look, in terms of our world today, Greece and Rome have really shaped our world and been its sources, its fontes, right, in so many hugely important ways. And as Christians, we come and we say, yeah, and at Jerusalem, the Old Testament, this is our spiritual heritage. The people of God throughout history who have known the true and living God, who have to whom He's revealed Himself and ultimately revealed Himself in Christ His Son. So yeah, I think that we look to. I think that knowing, we spent 2 years studying the Old Testament in third and fourth grade, I believe, in our curriculum, and I love that. Just being soaked in. And 2 years in kindergarten through second, it repeats kind of twice. So I think it's important to be kind of just full of the stories of the Bible.
And I think that kind of connects with another thing that you and I have shared in our friendship being here is the great books, and the way that the great books of our culture are pervaded with stories from the Bible and biblical characters and Christ figures and allusions. And if you don't have that basic understanding of the facts and figures of the Scripture, you can't read Shakespeare well. You can't read a lot of the great novels. You said that you're starting in on Divine Comedy. How have you seen kind of that biblical literacy help you in a burgeoning interest in greater literature?
Yeah, good question. So if we're thinking in terms of the epics, I guess there aren't a lot of connections to at least, like biblical literacy and maybe Homer and Virgil. And I know that there will be in Dante, but I'm still kind of working through that. There definitely have been some, Dostoevsky is just so thoroughly Christian. So having read a couple of his books in the last couple of years, there have definitely been some major ones there. So I think that, but they are fairly apparent in him as well. Maybe not as subtle. So I don't know. Like, I guess I'm still kind of somewhat waiting to see. I have seen that just my own understanding. It's been interesting to learn about the mythology and the stories of Greece and Rome, and then see how that starts to pop out kind of everywhere, where that I just didn't really have before. And, it just pops out in C.S. Lewis a ton, and it pops out in Dostoevsky a lot. So I've been definitely enriched in my reading of literature by my increased knowledge of Greece and Rome. Not that I know everything by any means yet, but
yeah, it's funny you mentioned the epics. Is one kind of connection between the Old Testament and the epics, which probably isn't literary or historical, that I've always found fascinating is, if you remember at the beginning of the Iliad, when Achilles doesn't want to go to battle, and he makes this metaphor of saying that just like the branch of a tree won't bloom almond fruit, he's not going to go to war. And in the same, in the Bible, you have Aaron and Aaron's staff, which has bloomed.
But the other staffs don't bloom.
Yeah, it's like as a symbol of Yahweh's faithfulness. And you have this same exact image talking about two undefeatable wills and their ability to overcome natural forces. And I do find that there are some of these universal themes that do come up in the Bible and Greek mythology that are interesting.
Yeah.
See how they interact with each other.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, I think that's good. I don't know. I mean, I guess there are certain things. I mean, so we've talked before too about just like having when you read like the Greek mythology and Homer. And I think it's in particular then when you come, it's like Acts 17 or something, right? We talked about this before, where you have the Greeks coming out to like proclaim Paul and Barnabas to be, Zeus and Hermes. Is that who it is, or something like that? And it just makes total sense. Yeah. Like you're like, oh wow, this was always so weird, but now I actually understand. Yeah. Like, of course, that's what they're doing. Yeah. And so it just fills in some of those gaps when you see kind of firsthand the kind of the Greek, I guess, mind when it came to religion and appeasing the gods. Like, of course, they're going to go slaughter a bull or something. So anyway, but I definitely think there is there are some interesting and really some good kind of back and forth between the biblical world and the classical. So,
I agree. So closing up, you're still passionate about helping people to cultivate a spiritual aspect of their life, to be genuine in their faith and to worship Jesus Christ. How do you see your vision for what you do in your work as coinciding with that personal conviction?
Yeah. So I say it all the time. I'm thankful to work in a space, in a vocation that is of just a direct benefit in ways that I can see and understand to Christ and His church. And I think it's a great privilege and blessing to be able to kind of make one's living in that kind of environment. I think, so to be a small part of, Christian educators and through them, Christian students, hopefully through our work, seeing them have the opportunity to use their God-given minds to their fullest, their God-given talents to their fullest, so that they can hold fast to the faith, once delivered to the saints, and fight the fight of faith in their own day. I mean, I think, I think there's a lot of joy in knowing that is sort of, it's we don't see it necessarily in the day-to-day, business operations around here, but we know that our work in God's grace is doing that for families out there and for schools, and so there's a lot of there's a lot of joy and thanks in knowing that our work is kind of accomplishing those goals.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Hey, well, thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Classical Etc. If you want to show support for the video, then you can hit the thumbs up icon below to give it a like. Or if you want to leave a comment, you can tell me what conversations you'd like me to have in the future. Check out our Memoria Press YouTube channel to find tons of other educational resources. And also a huge thank you to the Memoria Press Podcast Network. This is Classical Etc., and I'll see you next time.